Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Lisette, and I'm here to do our welcome. We're continuing our wonderful celebrations for Black History Month, and I'd like to start this special session with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that Brescia University College is located on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabeg, Haudenosaunee, Lenape, and Shawneetown nations, on lands connected with the London Township and Sombra Treaties of 1796 and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant wampum. With this, I respect the long-standing relationships that Indigenous nations have to this land, as they are the original caretakers. We acknowledge historical and ongoing injustices that Indigenous peoples, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit endure in Canada, and we accept responsibility as a public institution to contribute toward revealing and correcting miseducation, as well as renewing respectful relationships with Indigenous communities through our teaching, research, and community service.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Birabo Birungi Sarumaga, and I'm an executive student leader of Agents of Change here at Brescia. And with me today, I have Tamara Noor, who I would like to introduce herself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tamara Noor, and I'm the Access Services Coordinator at the Beryl Ivy Library, and it's a pleasure to be here today.
We are here today to continue the Black History Month celebration. With us, who we will be interviewing, is a very wonderful individual who was featured in CTV, CBC, and other publications. She is a slam poet and author of I Never Truly Hated You. She has represented London in 2 travel national festivals. She and her London team were ranked 4th place in Canada at the Canadian Festival of Spoken Word Poetry in 2019. To add, she has performed at the first ever Black Lives Matter protest here in London, Ontario, which had over 10,000 people attending. She is a recipient of the 2019 Louis Corey Trailblazer Award from the London Police and was showcased in the 2020 Night of Heroes for Community Living London. We are so excited to introduce Fauzia Agbonhin.
Hi, thank you so much for the amazing introduction. Thank you for having me here today. I'm gonna start off with a poem of mine that is actually in my book, I Never Truly Hated You. It is called The Great American Melting Pot. In 1914, Ford established an English school for the immigrants he had brought to America. On July 4th of that same year, there was a graduation ceremony. Every graduate of the English school stood in a room filled with phony sanctimony. They wore native gowns and walked onto a stage that lowered them down in this extravagant bowl-like figure, the Great American Melting Pot. When the graduates were raised back up, they were wearing Americanized clothes and accessories. This was Ford's way of ridding these people of their history. This is his way of stripping layers of culture away. This is his way of forcing them to conform. When I learned of this, I asked my parents about their experience with immigration. They said, daughter, our beauty isn't beauty here. The future belongs to those who don't sleep, who work tireless nights and tireless days. The future belongs to those who eat and breathe the American dream. This melting pot will mold you into a version of yourself that your motherland will not recognize. It will engrave red and white onto your skin. You will lose your mother tongue if you don't begin to fraternize with it. I know you say you want to be like me when you grow up, but you won't be. The American dream was never meant for me. No, you are the first generation for a reason. You will not have to take the bleeding, the beating, the dreaming of a better life. You will ease into freedom easier than I did. Assimilation will not be eradication for you. Adaption will not be extermination for you. You carry my native tongue in your mouth, but this melting pot is trying to give you 3rd-degree burns. They are trying to carve your homeland out of your chest. They are trying to rip my tongue out of you, forcing you to memorize a language that does not know how to express you, how to pronounce you, forcing you to warp your body until you can't even recognize you. When you were a child, I cried many nights knowing you'd eventually face people who knew what different looks like, who knew what different smelled like. My child, there's some borders you can't walk through, some barriers you can't break down with your bare hand. There are fences you can't climb. There are battles you will win only to reach the horizon and see a barren land, one that does not want you, one that does not accept you. when I will ask you to go back home to ruins, my daughter. Don't waste time trying to explain something to someone who isn't interested in understanding it, because it will leave you tired. And we cannot rest here, my daughter. Don't lose your peace trying to find your place in this world, because it will leave you tired. We can never rest here. Thank you.
That was incredible and incredibly powerful. Thank you for sharing that. I have the privilege of asking you the first question today, which is, how did you discover and facilitate your passion and talent for poetry, and what drew you to slam poetry specifically?
Okay, so I started writing poetry when I was 7 years old. I was in the second grade, and I immigrated from Nigeria to Canada when I was 5. So I was quite new to Canadian culture. I feel like it was during a time when I was going through the motions of assimilating into Canadian culture. I was in classes where no one else looked like me. My teachers didn't look like me. And I remember it being a very big jump from having, like, being surrounded by people who, you know, share your culture, and being surrounded by people who look just like you. There's no like feelings of intimidation or feelings of, oh, I'm different from other people in Nigeria. But I experienced that when I was in Canada. So I feel like for me, I was always looking for different ways to, like, connect with my homeland, connect with where I used to be. I feel like I can't remember all of my experiences when I was 7, but I remember it was very, very hard transition for me. And I remember that I really, really loved writing my emotions out, writing my feelings out. And I remember I loved English, and I loved poetry units in class that were taught. And I remember there was this one time when we had to do show and tell, and a lot of the other students brought in, like, you know, physical things like teddy bears or stuff like that to bring to show and tell. And I actually brought my mom's favorite poem. It's called Africa, My Africa by David Diop. And it's a poem about slavery. I didn't know that at the time, but it's a poem about slavery. It's a poem about Africa. And I just remember this poem connected with me and made me feel so seen and made me feel so heard. And it just reminded me of home completely. I remember performing it in front of this class of people who, you know, did not look like me at all. And I remember the silence that befell on the class when I started performing, and this, like, just feeling of being heard and seen, and, like, just being noticed, and people listening to me. And I just remember, like, the audience clapping, and my teacher telling me, like, oh, like, that's so amazing, da, da, da. And I think that's when I fell in love with performing poetry. Like, it wasn't even my poem, but I just fell in love with it. I just fell in love. And after that, I was just chasing that feeling since then till now.
That's amazing. I can kind of relate to that in the sense that I moved to Canada when I was 13. So I understand that feeling of being shocked. It's not necessarily like, it wasn't like a hard adjustment. It's just the shock of going from being surrounded by everyone, or like the majority of people look like you, they understand you, they have the same cultural, you know, background, beliefs, like you play the same games, to coming here where everything was very different. The only, you know, Black kid in your class, having to try and explain who you are, where you're from, without having judgmental questions or questions that are rooted in stereotypes, and having to like fend for yourself. And then I remember one day my mom, I can't remember the name of the book, but it was by a Nigerian writer, and it was just a regular fictional book because I like to read, and just being able to fantasize about a world where Africa isn't seen as less than, and you can enjoy the same stories that you see on TV or you read in other fictional books, but relating to who you are, was like the best feeling ever. And like one day I hope to maybe write something like that, but we'll see. Speaking about writing, how long have you been writing poetry?
I've been writing poetry kind of on and off since I was 7. It started off with like adaptations of like Itsy Bitsy Spider, Mary Had a Little Lamp, like little like kid stuff. Like that's what it started off like. And then I think eventually, honestly, academia really fostered my love for poetry, because what would happen is that I'd be given so many different like assignments and reports, and what I would do whenever I had an essay to write, whenever I had a report, I'd be like, can I write this entire report in poetry? And they'd be like, okay. And then I would do that. And so I would always like every single, I just remember like when I was in middle school, every single report I was writing it in poetry, and my teachers would let me, and they'd be like, okay, sure, like I'm not gonna, no one's ever asked that, but go ahead. And I think that's kind of how I got better and better at it, just I guess practice over and over and over again. And then I think in grade 9 is when I actually had my first gig, where I got to perform at this like this coffee house shop. And I remember like it wasn't even a paid gig, like I can't even remember, like I don't even think people were really paying attention to me, but I was so happy. I was like standing in front of the mic. I was like, the mic was too big for me, I was really small. And so yeah, so that's when I started performing. Grade 9 is when I started performing, but definitely like since when I was 7, that's when I started writing.
So I know a lot of people admire you and look up to you, so it's always interesting to know, who are your favorite authors and poets?
Okay. Top number 1, Maya Angelou, 100%. Oh my goodness. Maya Angelou, oh, she's everything to me. I can't read a lot of her work because it is quite triggering, but I love her. Oh my God, I could talk about her forever, but let's move on. Her, number 1, love her. Looking at poets, Rudy Francisco, Blythe Bard, those two are like spoken word artists that they're very underground. Like not a lot of people know about them, but if you're into button poetry, oh my goodness, their stuff is so amazing. Like my work is really, really heavily inspired by Rudy Francisco's work and Blythe Bard's work. And even in my book, like you'll see, like I have so many little footnotes sometimes in some of my poems where you'll see that I write, oh, this is inspired by Blythe Bard, this is inspired by Rudy Francisco. Like it's just those two people, like just intertwined all my poems. Like I feel like honestly, like at first, like my poems weren't, I think, as lyrically, like they didn't have the metaphors and similes that they have now. They didn't have the visuals they have now. I feel like now I'm able to really like get people into a space and like keep them there. Before it was just kind of like, oh, I'm rhyming, da, 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 da. Like, but Rudy Francisco and Blythe Bard really did facilitate like my ability to use like to really just work with words and stuff like that, because they are magical with that stuff. As for authors, weirdly enough, I don't really read. I should read, right? Everyone gets surprised. I want to read more and I will, but I'm not someone that reads a lot. So I don't really have a favorite author. Like if I am gonna read, I'll just pick a random book and I'll just read it. So I don't really have like an author where it's like I'm reading all the time. If that makes sense.
No, that does make sense. Sometimes I say I like to read, but if you ask me what my favorite author is or what book I'm reading right now, I cannot tell you a single thing.
I can't tell you.
So it's okay. And when you were talking about your poems and your favorite poets, I wanted to ask you, what's your favorite poem that you've ever written, and if you could share it with us today?
Yes, I can. I think one of my favorite poems that I ever wrote is The Great American Melting Pot, the one that I just shared with you, but I'm going to share another one that I have been performing a lot because I absolutely love it. It is called Pixie Dust. Being a Black girl with anxiety is knowing that you are 1 part magic, 2 parts broken, and always silenced. It is an oxymoron. If a Black girl cannot command a room with her voice, does she even deserve to speak? If a Black girl cannot take up space, does she even deserve to be? I've always wondered what happens to a Black girl's magic if she's too anxious to be anything magical, too weak to be strong, too scared to be bold, too afraid to be everything she's deemed magical for. When the Black girl shows you ashes, you see pixie dust. When the Black girl shows you scars, you see wings. When little Black girls fall, they always make sounds, but silence is the only thing that hears them. And silence has many chimes. It is a therapist not understanding why my Blackness has broken me. It is the likelihood of my sexual assault being 3.5 times higher. It is me telling someone I'm tired of being a strong Black woman and they recommend that I stop working out. It is no one considering being compared to a slave when I was 15, a reasonable source of trauma. When a little Black girl falls and silence hears her, does she still fall down? Does she ever cry out? If a little Black girl screams and no one makes a sound, will her magic save her? If a little Black girl falls and all the magic in the world can't catch her, does the silence kill her? Is she still pixie dust and wings or a broken thing? What happens to a Black girl if she's too anxious to be anything magical? I'm still waiting to receive the wand and the fairy dust you promised me. Thank you.
Wow. I can see why you gravitate towards that as your favorite poem.
I love it so much.
Yeah.
I do too. That was incredible. Thank you.
Thank you.
So as a researcher and librarian myself, I'm particularly interested in your answer to this next question, which is, do you do a lot of research first before you begin your poetry?
Interestingly enough, no. But the reason why I'm saying no is because I don't really consider as research. So my major is criminology. I'm in honors criminology at Western, and then my minor is media information and technology. What usually happens is I just have a knack for learning, or like when things happen in the world, like the George Floyd situation, for example, incarceration rates and all that stuff. Whenever I see even like documentaries, like the 13 documentary that Ava Duvall, I think that's her name. But the 13 documentary, like watching things like that will interest me. Like that's just what I'm interested in. So I will like kind of go out of my way to like watch documentaries on things that are going on in the world that have to do with like Black liberation or female liberation or Islamophobia and all that stuff, LGBTQ rights and stuff like that. And also it's just part of my school. Like I have to do that stuff. So I get information that I can use and make into poetry all the time. So do I do research? Okay, yes, but it's not necessarily that I'm thinking in my head, okay, I want to make a poem about this. Let me do research so I can make a poem. It's that I kind of just gravitate towards information that will then I then will want to turn into a poem, if that makes sense. Because my poetry it's not really something that I could do. It's something that comes straight from my heart. Like it's something that comes when I'm feeling like a lot of emotions. So I'd have to already have enough information about something to the point where it makes me angry or the point where it makes me upset to then make poetry. It's not necessarily that, the thought of a poem comes before the research. So I don't know if that makes sense.
Yes, it's more of an organic process. It's not like a deliberate research project or anything.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, and talking about how like when you write your poems, it's all about, your emotions, how are you feeling, what has just happened, what have I watched, what documentary have I been focusing on. I kind of just want to learn how your book, I Never Truly Hated You, came about, because it's quite a brilliant read.
The funny thing about that book, I did not want to publish it. My mom forced me to publish it. Like that's the really, really funny thing about it. And clearly I listened to her because mother knows best. But I did not want to publish that book, actually. I feel like it's a very personal book. Like it's literally my coming of age story. Like I said, I've been writing since I was 7, and I started performing, but I feel like the types of poems that I perform and the types of poems I write down for people to read are two completely different things. And there are a lot of poems in that book that I planned on never ever performing or showing to people. So I actually didn't want to publish that book. And the reason wasn't even just because like, okay, like these are personal, It wasn't just that. It was also because when I started writing, I wrote poetry, but I also started writing like short stories. I got into like really like creating like novels and stuff like that. And so what I initially wanted to do is I initially wanted to publish a novel. I have a novel that like is in the works, but I wanted to publish my novel first, and then I wanted to create like, I guess, like, I don't know, like a fan base, connections, and network and stuff like that with that. And then I wanted to kind of like just like throw in like a poetry book, and like I just didn't think it would do well because it's like poetry is so niche, right? Like I was like, who's even gonna read it? Who's even gonna buy it? No one's gonna want it. Like, what's the point? Like I'm just gonna throw it out, you know, at some point. Like, so I was very much, and I also am the type of person that I don't really recognize, I have imposter syndrome. So it's very hard for me to recognize how good my poems actually are, except when people are telling me that they're good. And even then it's kind of hard. So I just didn't think it was that great. But my mom continuously never stopped for so many years telling me that I need to publish it, that I have so many poems, like you need to put it out there. Da, 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 da. She would not let me rest. So at some point I was like, okay, I turned 18. I was like, okay, I'll publish it. And I did. And that's what happened. There's not really a story behind it. That's literally the story.
Moms always know best.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're all very grateful to your mom that she encouraged you to publish your book, for sure.
Yeah, because I couldn't imagine publishing a book at 18, especially one that's so personal, because poems typically are personal. And so like having, you know, to curate like a whole bunch of poems, put them together, put a story behind it, think about it, sit with it, and then say, okay, I think this is good enough. And then just wait and see if people will accept your poetry, because technically that's who you are. Your poems are who you are, and just kind of like accept you and your poems. It must have been nerve-wracking. And that's such a big accomplishment at such a young age. And I'm just so in awe, and I'd like to pick your brain a little bit and see if there's anything new that you're maybe working on, another book. You said a novel, but any more poems, anything?
I've actually made a lot of poems since I published that, like I Never Truly Hated You. So a lot of people have asked me to publish another poetry book. You know me. Well, like, I might, maybe, but I feel like I really want to focus on my novel first. Like I don't want to put it on the back burner, because I feel like when I published this book, like it was like the focus of everything. Like literally, like people kept asking me to perform at different places and like show it and like sell it and like all that stuff. Like it became the focus of everything. Like there's no time to focus on anything else. I feel like I completely don't mind publishing a second book for it, since I know that there's a market for it now, that people, you know, like it, like my poems and stuff like that. And I like a lot of the poetry that I've been creating recently. So definitely it's been on my mind. But definitely first I want to publish at least one novel first.
I'll be on the lookout
Yeah.
for your novel and any more poems that you publish out. And speaking about how in the beginning I was talking about how you performed at the Black Lives Matter protest here in London, I was at that protest too. And I remember just standing with my friends, and I couldn't help thinking how profound and amazing your poem was. And I was just like, who is that? How can I do that? Because, you know, like everything you said was like everything that I was feeling inside, and you just articulated it in such a very concise, but in such a wonderful way that I just couldn't help but feel inspired. And I just watching you was inspirational. But how did you feel to perform in such a, you know, like in a big crowd in such a heavy environment?
I'm going to be so honest. I thought I was going to poop my pants. That's not professional to say at all, but I really, oh my goodness, I was so stressed out. People told me that like, oh, like nobody could tell. My hands were shaking. Oh, that was the biggest crowd I'd ever performed for in my life. I think till this day, I've never performed for a crowd that big. There have been crowds that have been close, but not that big. And I think that performance kind of is what really put me a little bit on the map, if that makes sense. But yeah, I was very much terrified. The crowd was so amazing though. Like I just remember like getting so like everyone was like yelling and like hooting and hollering and all that stuff. And I felt so loved and appreciated. And I felt so, I don't know, I felt so at home. It was such a beautiful, beautiful crowd. I was so happy. And it's so interesting that you say that like, yeah, like you were saying that poetry is really personal. It is. And I wanted to say like that's actually one of the reasons why I didn't want to publish my book, is because I was worried that people wouldn't like it. And it's like one thing for like people to not like a novel or something, or like to critique it, but like this is like my life. Like everything I write is like my life, my experiences. Like everything I write is who I am as a person. Like poetry is not really doesn't have a structure. There's no real right or wrong way to write poetry. So it's like for someone to say, oh, like this is wrong, or like this, you know, needs a bit of work, like that's so horrifying to me. Obviously, like I feel like a lot of things, like anything can be improved, but I just feel like if people genuinely like had hatred for it, I don't know. I think I would cry. But yeah.
Yeah, because like I just like sometimes I'll write stuff about like, you know, how I'm feeling, and I'll try and articulate it in a way that if someone was to read it, they'd be like, oh, okay, yeah, this is like a nice bit of art. But just like your poems are, it's like you get a little piece of you. Like with each poem is like a little piece of Fauzia, and you get to like understand like your emotions, like the turmoil, like just like, and it's quite amazing really, because it's hard, but the way that you do it makes it seem so effortless, like you were just quite born to do it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I absolutely agree with that, for sure. So my next question is, how did it feel to be featured in CTV, CBC, and other publications?
I couldn't believe it when it happened. Like even when so CBC, they all interviewed me. Like I feel like even while the interview was happening, I was like, this is not happening. And then it was like when the articles actually went up, I was like, oh my God, this is not happening. Like I don't know, like it's so weird. Like it's so weird. Because poetry was never something that I ever thought was gonna take me anywhere. Like I just feel like, okay, if you grew up in, you know, an African household and you ever wanted to do like art or something, like you know what it's like for your parents to be like, come on, like a doctor, lawyer, da 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 da. Like not like poetry. You know what I'm saying? Like it's so like it's just not something that you ever think is gonna make you money. Like you don't think that it's gonna, you're not, you don't, it's just not a thought. It was never a thought that this was gonna be something that was gonna take off the way it did. And that it did. And I feel like till this day, I'm still kind of in shock. Like every time, every time people ask me to perform for things, I'm still in shock till this day. I think the feeling is shock. I'm very grateful though. I'm very, very grateful for all the things that I've achieved and all the people that have helped me get there. And all the people that have believed in me and all that stuff, but definitely shock. Because I can't believe it still.
Well, it's definitely well-deserved, and I'm not shocked at all.
Yeah.
And I was going to ask if you could share one last poem for us.
If I can. The last poem I want to share is called The Truth and Its Three Sides. And this is the most recent poem I've made. And yeah, I love this one. Okay. The Truth and Its Three Sides. I'm a child from Africa. I was 5 when I left Nigeria, meaning my tongue was stamped with the colors green and white. My accent acted like a metal door lodged in my throat that only allowed certain words to pass through. The kids at school did not understand me. I dressed funny. My clothes were scented with food that the kids at school didn't even know how to pronounce, let alone eat. I used to be really close to my Africa. Some of you now know just enough about me to assume that this country is the axis that the sun revolves around. You will know just enough about Africa to assume I should be grateful to be here. I was a child from Africa, meaning I have seen savannah. I've seen all the beauty of a rainforest under the balls of my feet. I didn't have to search far to see a waterfall in any direction. I was 5 when I left Nigeria, meaning I grew up in the only place my melanin ripens all year round. I was 5 when I left Nigeria, meaning I was never a child from your Africa. I mean, my Africa. I mean, the Africa. The truth often has 3 sides. The truth is, when I look at your Africa, I see bones protruding out of skin, flesh barely hanging on, teeth chattering, dirt-stained cheeks. Your photos reek of blame and sickness, and the scent of a third world country can be smelt from half a world away. I am a child from Africa, meaning I am a survivor of hunger, right? I must have blistered feet, sand-cracked knuckles, knee scraped, dirt stains running through my veins. Yes, I am dirty. How could I not be? Coming from a land where the sky is painted yellow instead of blue, where dirt and soot and disheveled concrete is my only mode of transportation, where $1 can feed a room of people who look like me for a whole week. Truth is, your Africa has taken my Africa away from me. Sometimes I can't tell the difference between a picture of Nigeria and a herd of cattle. Sometimes I see a photo of Nigeria and I'm rattled how my parents could have lived in a country so far behind in development it had to settle for 3rd place. But then I realize we are seen as uneducated by people who still think Africa is a country, still think I must have crawled on all 4s out of its jungle, still think I went to school on a camel. My parents were dared to be called poor by a country sunken in credit, by a country that uses colored bodies as mortar for the building blocks to its society, by a country dismembered indigenous identities at dinner tables and then asked us why we didn't want to partake in the feast, by a country that stole the land beneath their feet, grabbed it with both hands, wrapped it in barbed wire, and trademarked it with beavers and a red and white flag. This country likes to uproot the land we walk on, use third world bodies to fertilize its soil, and then remind us of all the development it's made. The truth often has 3 sides, often wrapped its arms around our necks, keeps us in its chokehold long enough for us to feel the ground sink beneath our feet. The truth is the whiplash upon impact. It is the blunt force trauma. The truth is your Africa stole my Africa's identity. The truth is I was 5 when I left Nigeria, so your Africa is all I know about my homeland. It is yellow filters. It is dirt. It is hunger. From the sharp edge of the world, I am a child from Africa, I think. Thank you.
Wow, that was incredible.
That was amazing.
Thank you.
That was incredible.
Oh my God, a breath.
Fauzia, you left tears and chills in my body.
Oh my goodness.
On behalf of the Beryl Ivey Library and Agents of Change and Brescia University College, I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for sharing your talent and your heart with us today. And I encourage everyone, I think Tamara, you can hold up a copy of her book. I encourage everyone to get this book. It's a must for your collection. We have it at Beryl Ivey Library, but it's also sold on Amazon if you would like to purchase a copy. Again, Fauzia, thank you so much for your time. And we encourage all of you listeners out there to continue celebrating Black excellence this month, continue to go and take advantage of all the events this month and beyond the month of February. We have to be celebrating 365 days of the year. So thank you, Fauzia, again. Take care of yourself and we'll be in touch, I'm sure.
Thank you so much. Of course.